Well, up until now, the US has relied on sanctions to restrict Iran's oil trade, discouraging the buyers. The blockade is now taking aim at the oil itself. So Iran has been exporting 1.8 million barrels a day. It's a vital source of revenue for the regime. Sanctions have crippled Iran's economy, and soaring inflation has sparked mass protests over the winter. Admiral Roughead is a retired US military officer. He served as the Chief of US Naval Operations. He joins me now from Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us, Admiral. And I gather this is the sort of work the Navy is prepared for.
Absolutely. I think the interdiction of the ships, the boarding of the ships, is something that we practice, that we have procedures for, and I don't see that as being a challenge. The fact that we'll be able to track ships that have called in Iranian ports or will be calling in Iranian ports, I think that information will be readily available. And then it's just a question of stopping the ships and boarding them.
What sort of resource are we talking about here?
Well, I think you would see boarding teams operating from some of the larger ships, whether it be a combatant or perhaps one of our amphibious ships that's operating outside of the Gulf. I do think, and I heard the comment about the ship passing through and not having been boarded. My take is that it will be more likely that the ships would be boarded after they pass through the straits and not to get involved in a boarding operation in the straits proper. So I think it's not unusual that one of the ships would have gone out. The next question then becomes, what is done with the ship and the cargo once they've been interdicted? And that's something that I think will probably be of interest in the coming days.
Well, how do you mean? Because of the logistics involved?
Yeah, exactly. Once you have the ship, what port does it go to? Does it go to an anchorage? What is the status of the cargo? What is the role of the shipping company? What is the status of the crew that might be on that ship? All of those, I think, are second and third order issues that will come out from any ships that are boarded.
And probably not something that the president thought about, do you think, ahead of announcing the blockade?
Well, I'll leave that to the president to decide what he thought about and what the plan might be.
In terms, we're looking at, an aerial image there. As you say, it'd be very tricky to operate in the Strait of Hormuz, but you were suggesting that that wouldn't be the plan anyway. You wouldn't go into the strait and have that sort of vulnerability there. You're working in the ocean outside and effectively intimidating any ships that do want to go through. Is that right?
I think so. I mean, I think it would be much easier to not have to contend with perhaps some drone activity, missile activity, small boat activity that would be much easier for Iran to execute in the straits proper. So my sense is it would be, out of the straits that the boardings and the interdiction would take place. Similarly, if there are ships that have declared to call in an Iranian port, I would say that it'd be more likely that they would be boarded prior to entering the Gulf. And at that point, those ships can turn around and respond to the orders from their company or their investors, whatever it may be.
A lot of this oil, as we understand it, is heading to China. I'm not sure whether that would be on Iranian or Chinese ships. I'm not sure how that works. But would you have concerns about intercepting a ship destined for China? Because that does shine a very different light onto this conflict, doesn't it?
Oh, I think it would. I think it causes a significant problem as to what would be done and what actions would be taken, what would be the reaction of the Chinese government. But there are other countries that I believe are equally as concerned. For example, there have been Pakistani ships that have moved through the Gulf. There have been Indian ships that have gone through the Gulf. And what are the consequences there, particularly for a country like Pakistan that has been quite hospitable in hosting the ceasefire talks? The other question, even though we may be blockading Iranian ports, the real question is, when does the strait open? When will it be safe for example, American flagged commercial ships to transit in and out of the Gulf. There's still a lot of shipping that's bottled up in the Gulf that needs to get out. There's still some shipping that really needs to come in to provide provisions to the Gulf Arab states. And the question for me remains, when will the straits be open and when will commerce return to normal? That's the big question.
Yeah, and it matters for the whole world, doesn't it? Admiral Gary Roughead, really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.